the scholars, this is a political witch hunt, and I think you should all be ashamed of yourself. Now, it should probably not surprise you to learn that generally witnesses don't get to introduce things into evidence by pulling objects out of their sweaty underclothes. And the financial statements at issue here, which all contain the disclaimer, had already been admitted into evidence. But Trump was determined to have some kind of Perry Mason moment, and this led to some intense moments between him and the judge. And this was just one of the insane things that happened when Donald Trump took the stand in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud trial. And the trial isn't even over yet. But a lot has happened, so let's talk about what happened when Trump took the stand. Now, through all this, Trump has requested that his trials be televised. And I hate to say it, but I really agree with the former president on this point. Some people claim it would be good for Trump, some people claim it would be good for prosecutors, but either way, this is of national importance, and it really seems like the public has a right to know. Sadly, here, this trial is not televised, so unfortunately we have to rely on secondhand accounts. But there were a lot of people taking seemingly very good notes during this whole thing. Now, as you may recall, this trial stems from a civil lawsuit filed by the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. The lawsuit accuses Trump, John Jr., Eric, the Trump Organization, and several company executives of inflating the value of the Trump Organization's assets and Trump's personal wealth to obtain better terms on loans and insurance. The New York Attorney General wants to recoup $250 million and limit the Trump's ability to do business in New York. And before the trial, Judge Arthur Engoron already ruled that Trump committed financial fraud by overstating the value of his assets, and he canceled the New York business certificates of several of Trump businesses. That order is stayed pending appeal. Now, the current trial will resolve the other fraud claims and determine what penalties the Trumps must pay. During the trial, Trump has continually accused Judge Engoron of pursuing him for political reasons, and after he shared a social media post attacking the judge's principal law clerk, Judge Engoron issued a limited gag order. Now, Trump violated that order twice, and Judge Engoron has fined him $5,000 and then $10,000. And because of this conduct, Trump was forced to take the stand for the first time to defend the references that he was making in the media, where he claimed that the witness that he was referring to was Michael Cohen, not the judge's clerk, but Judge Engoron all but called Trump a liar. He said, quote, "As a trier of fact, I find this testimony rings hollow and untrue. The Oxford English Dictionary defines alongside as close to the side of, next to. So yeah, probably not how you want your first testimony in that court to go." But the judge's gag order initially only applied to Trump, but then Trump's lawyers, Christopher Kise and Alina Habba, started criticizing the clerk during trial. They argued that she was passing the judge notes and that this was evidence of anti-Trump bias. Clerks communicate with their judges. That's a perfectly acceptable practice. As I'm sure Kise and Habba surely know, Judge Engoron then extended the gag order to limit Kise and Habba, and that too is now on appeal. But things went equally poorly when Trump took the stand in the case in chief. When Trump took the stand, he clashed with the judge immediately, giving long-winded answers and serving up political monologues. Kise told the judge that Trump's decades as a real estate developer gave his opinion extra weight. Quote, "If my choices were Donald Trump or Attorney General James, respectfully, I would go with Donald Trump." Kise urged the judge to give Trump, who he described as the once and future president, leeway to answer questions the way that he wanted to. Quote, "With this witness, I would suggest it's far more efficient to listen to what he has to say and take it in." But that comment struck a nerve with Judge Engoron. He said, quote, "No, I'm not here to hear what he has to say. I'm here to hear him answer questions. Sit down." Judge Engoron said he was considering drawing negative conclusions from Trump's testimony. Quote, "We got another speech. I beseech you to control him if you can. If you can't, I will. I will excuse him and draw every negative inference that I can." Now remember, this is a bench trial, so Engoron is acting as the trier of fact, who will decide what really happened. Here, there's no jury, famously because it seems that Trump's lawyers did not request a jury or check the box that would have created a jury in this situation. It's actually incredibly normal for a judge to be the trier of fact instead of a jury. It happens all the time, especially in business-related matters. But here, I think it was clear that Trump's team wanted a jury and just forgot to check the box. But later on in the questioning, Trump was especially triggered by questions about Mar-a-Lago, the Florida golf club where he resides for most of the year. Engoron's pretrial ruling finding Trump liable for fraud noted that the local assessor valued Mar-a-Lago at $18 million, while in documents Trump valued it at hundreds of millions more. Now, obviously the assessor's opinion, "No, I'm not here to hear what he has to say. I'm here to hear him answer questions. Sit down." Judge Engoron said he was considering drawing negative conclusions from Trump's testimony. Quote, "We got another speech. I beseech you to control him if you can. If you can't, I will. I will excuse him and draw every negative inference that I can." Now remember, this is a bench trial, so Engoron is acting as the trier of fact, who will decide what really happened. Here, there's no jury, famously because it seems that Trump's lawyers did not request a jury or check the box that would have created a jury in this situation. It's actually incredibly normal for a judge to be the trier of fact instead of a jury. It happens all the time, especially in business-related matters. But here, I think it was clear that Trump's team wanted a jury and just forgot to check the box. But later on in the questioning, Trump was especially triggered by questions about Mar-a-Lago, the Florida golf club where he resides for most of the year. Engoron's pretrial ruling finding Trump liable for fraud noted that the local assessor valued Mar-a-Lago at $18 million, while in documents Trump valued it at hundreds of millions more. Now, obviously, the assessor's opinion was only one and was not dispositive, but Trump certainly didn't back down and went the other direction, insisting that he believes the club is worth as much as $1.5 billion. Now, the Attorney General has argued that Mar-a-Lago would never be valued that high because the property is deed restricted and cannot be used as a residence or be developed. And Trump said that he agreed to the deed restriction for tax purposes. He admitted that the lower assessed value limits the property's tax burden. Quote, "There are a lot of advantages to the club status. The smartest thing to do would be to have a club and have one member." Now, as you can probably tell, Trump is going to need a good lawyer on appeal to help him with his terrible testimony. But if you want a great lawyer, my firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If you've had an injury or death in the family, suffered a data breach, or were involved in a car crash, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney who can. Just click on the link in the description for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team. So the link is down below. Now, this isn't the worst argument in the world. Arguing that a clause that the court has already ruled several times doesn't say what you say it says is the worst argument, but it's still not very good. Because in 1985, Trump purchased Mar-a-Lago from the Post Foundation and used the estate as a private residence until 1995. Trump faced hostility from Palm Beach residents who blocked his attempt to subdivide the property into multiple housing lots. So in April of 1995, the estate became a private club. Trump signed an agreement with the city banning club members from spending more than 21 days a year at the club's guest suites. Trump also granted conservation easements to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And in 2002, hoping to reduce his tax bill, Trump granted a new development easement to the Historic Preservation Trust. It, quote, "limits changes to the property including, without limitation, division or subdivision of Mar-a-Lago for any purpose including use as single-family homes, the interior renovation of the mansion, which may be necessary and desirable for sale of the property as a single-family residential suite, the construction of new buildings, and the obstruction of open vistas." The deed says, quote, "the club and Trump intend to forever extinguish their right to develop or use the property for any purpose other than club use." And according to Trump, the deed language is not legally binding. He said, "Intend does not mean we will do it. If someone wanted to change it later, I believe they would have the right to do it." But Trump stopped short of saying he believed the property could be developed into a private residence. Quote, "if somebody wanted it, the smartest thing to do, have a club and have one member, and that would be the member who lives in the club. But it's much more valuable and will show that in 2 weeks or 5 weeks or 9 weeks or whenever this thing goes, that its biggest value is in using it as a club." And although conservation easements in Florida are said to be perpetual, they can be amended or released by agreement with the easement holder. The National Historic Preservation Trust has agreed to amend conservation easements to allow development in the past. However, releasing an easement is controversial and is not guaranteed. The property sits on 17 acres between the Atlantic Ocean and Lake Worth, so Trump is right that it's potentially worth a lot of money. But Judge Engoron relied on the tax assessor's value, which put the market value of Mar-a-Lago at between 18 and 27.6 million. Now, that's probably on the low end, especially since tax assessor valuations tend to be low. But at the end of the day, the tax assessor's value is still based on what Trump was telling the local tax assessor the property was worth, and that's a number based on his desire for low taxes and tolerances on the land. And it sounds like Trump knows he might not have a legal right to build private residences on the property, but he leaves open the possibility of negotiating different restrictions with the National Trust. He can also argue that even with the deed's broad language, there's still things that he can do to develop the property that would make the valuation higher. But Trump could also face opposition from the U.S. Treasury. If the easement was subject to an income tax deduction, then Treasury regulations suggest that easements must be perpetual and would need to be extinguished by a court. And prosecutors confronted Trump with his own comments about the 40 Wall Street property, which he valued at more than $500 million. In 2009, Capital One expressed concerns about Trump's cash flow. The bank had lent him $160 million, and Trump was claiming that 40 Wall Street was worth $500 million, even though the building only produced $9 million in revenue that year. According to the Attorney General, Capital One met with Trump, and commercial real estate firm Cushman & Wakefield came in to assess the asset, determining it was worth $200 million as of August 1st, 2010. Trump, however, insisted the building was worth much more, at least $600 million, because it was allegedly making around $50 to $60 million per year. Trump apparently made these comments to a Forbes reporter on tape, but he told the court that he did not recall making the statements.
Where did you get that from?
Well, we're here to listen to what you have to say.
$64 million net after debt service this year, at least.
In a 2022 article, Forbes reported that Trump admitted in 2015 to his own involvement in bolstering his assets because a high net worth is, quote, good for financing. Trump first denied telling Forbes that he needed a good net worth, but then admitted that having a high net worth is helpful for some kinds of financing. 40 Wall Street apparently has never gotten close to raking in $50 million per year. Annual net operating income peaked at $20.7 million in 2018. And the Attorney General showed through Trump's testimony that despite much lower and sometimes even negative net revenue from leasing that same building, Trump used that $500 million valuation to get better loan terms. And Trump testified that the value of his property at 40 Wall Street is hundreds of millions of dollars more than what she says. She doesn't even know what 40 Wall Street is. And that led to a very testy lunch break. During the break, the parties continued to squabble, and Trump made a Truth Social post that only quoted part of the judge's quote, saying, "No, I'm not here to hear what President Trump has to say," and then left out the other part and all of the context of that particular quote. Then Attorney General James took to Twitter to fire back at Trump's testimony that she doesn't know what 40 Wall Street is, saying, quote, "Don't tell, I can see it from my office window." And then Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, spent her lunch break explaining herself to an NBC News correspondent, quote, "When I followed up on if she is urging Trump to answer more concisely, knowing Engoron will be the one delivering penalties stemming from the suit, Habba said that she would not tell Trump that because she would not agree to represent someone and then try to limit their free speech." And then Habba later stood outside the courtroom and went into a full-on rant about the judge. She said Judge Engoron turned red with rage when Trump testified and accused him of wanting to silence Trump.
Then why exactly am I being paid as an attorney, and why exactly are taxpayer dollars being used in this courtroom? You have a right to hire a lawyer who can stand up and say something when they see something wrong. But I was told to sit down today. I was yelled at, and I've had a judge who is unhinged slamming a table. Let me be very clear. I don't tolerate that in my life. I'm not going to tolerate it here. And you know what? You shouldn't either.
Wow. Yeah. So basically...
Oh,
no, they are getting absolutely screwed in the...
Jesus, hot as shit in my room. Hey. Ooh. Whoa. Okay. Fuck. Mm. 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 Okay. You. You would be. Yeah. Mm. Okay. Okay. We got RULE. Fuck. Okay.
The courtroom and are trying to try their case in the court of public opinion. This is a very unusual move, sure to piss off the judge. And yeah, it just doesn't recognize that judges have discretion to run their courtrooms how they want. And as a lawyer, usually you just have to live with it. They might be trying to save some things for appeal, but a lot of the day-to-day stuff that happens inside of a courtroom is unappealable, and they're just going to have to live with it. Clearly, they are trying to do some stuff that is good for them in an extrajudicial context, but yeah, things are going from bad to worse inside of the courtroom. And then after lunch, the prosecutor questioned Trump about several loan agreements with Deutsche Bank. When Trump developed the old post office property in Washington, D.C., he had to agree to certain representations to get the loan. He affirmed to the bank that he had a minimum required cash balance, a minimum total net worth, and provided fair and accurate financial statements for the current and prior years. The Attorney General is trying to prove that Trump and his co-defendants deceived the bank to get favorable terms and a lower interest rate. And notably, Trump sold the old post office lease last year for $375 million. And Trump was expected to receive $126 million, with each of the adult kids expected to receive roughly $4 million from the sale. Trump affirmed that the total proceeds were $139 million. And I'm sure the Attorney General will argue that the state should be allowed to claw back those profits. Trump argued that he complied with the lending requirements, even though it doesn't look as if he was really worth $2.5 billion as he alleged. Quote, the numbers are far greater than the $2.5 billion, therefore you have no case. Now, one of the covenants that Trump affirmed to get the bank to lend is that his statement of financial condition are true and accurate in all material respects. However, when Assistant Attorney General Wallace asked Trump about the valuations of specific properties, Trump claimed that the documents included a disclaimer that absolved him and the company from liability for inaccuracies. Quote, the disclaimer clause says, if there's a mistake, if there's something, don't rely on it. They always hold up in court, except maybe this court. Trump has been calling this a worthless clause.
But we have a clause in the contract. It's like a buyer beware clause.
Trump is referring to the disclaimers that his accountants included on the statements of financial condition. The disclaimer says that these statements were not audited and the company can't say whether the financial statements comply with generally accepted accounting principles. But Judge Engron, as we've talked about, has already rejected this argument in his pretrial order. Quote, defendants' reliance on these, quote, worthless disclaimers is worthless. The worthless clause does not say what defendants say it says, does not rise to the level of an enforceable disclaimer, and cannot be used to insulate fraud as to facts particularly within defendants' knowledge, even vis-a-vis sophisticated recipients. And given this earlier ruling, Judge Engron wasn't willing to let Trump testify repeatedly that the disclaimers absolved him from liability. And even if this order did not already exist, witnesses are there to testify about facts and generally cannot testify to their opinions about legal issues. Now, the Attorney General was arguing that Trump was desperate to inflate his personal
Oh,
wealth
it's
and
hot.
that he was stealing companies' to manipulate the numbers. When Trump was asked about the valuations of specific properties, he insisted that some of the numbers were inflated because property values increase over time. In fact, discussing property valuations for 2014, Trump said, quote, if you carry that forward to 2021, all of those valuations were low. So in Trump's mind, if a property was going to be worth more almost a decade later, he was justified in simply adding that increased value back in 2014. Not surprisingly, Judge Engron previously rejected this argument. But then Trump testified that the valuations weren't accurate anyway because they didn't include his brand value, i.e. the value that Trump attributes to the Trump brand name. AG Wallace pounced on this response, quote, are you testifying that these financial statements are not accurate? And then Trump tried to walk back the response by saying that they were accurate except for the brand value, plus the error he made in the square footage of his penthouse, plus an error in the overvaluation of the Seven Springs property. So yeah, a lot of errors. Now, Trump was also testifying that the banks didn't care about his financial statements and that the banks loved Trump because he helped them make money. However, when Wallace showed Trump a loan agreement he had signed with Deutsche Bank in 2012, Trump agreed that his financial statements were intended to induce banks to lend money. And that's a key element of the Attorney General's fraud case. Despite Trump's denial to the contrary, the statements were designed to get favorable loan and insurance terms. Trump then launched into a monologue about what his bankers will say and stressing that the financial statements were not really documents that the banks paid much attention to. They looked at the deal, they looked at the asset. If it is real estate, they looked at the location. Though a retired Deutsche Bank official had already testified that Trump's financial statements were the linchpin in his loan approvals. She also said that although the bank didn't do full appraisals, it sometimes gave haircuts to Trump's valuations. She said the bankers called them, quote, sanity checks on Trump's most outrageous numbers. And Trump testified that he relied on two longtime Trump Organization executives and an outside accounting firm to prepare his financial statements. He said ex-CFO Alan Weisselberg would give him a draft before each year's statement was finalized and that he'd, quote, look it over and maybe have a suggestion, but it wasn't very important. You've made it important, but it wasn't very important to me. And the Attorney General's office asked Trump about the trust he established to manage his assets before he entered the White House. They established that Trump restored himself as the sole trustee shortly before Biden's inauguration, but then gave up control again in July of 2021, just days after Alan Weisselberg and the Trump Organization were indicted for tax fraud. At first, Trump claimed that he made Don Jr. his trustee because he trusted his business acumen and was returning to politics. But on cross-examination, Trump agreed that he did so because of increasing legal pressure. Quote, you and about every other Democrat district attorney, AG, and U.S. attorneys were coming at me from 15 different sides, all Democrats, Trump haters. Weisselberg pleaded guilty to tax fraud, and Wallace wanted to know if this changed Trump's opinion of Weisselberg's work for the company. Trump said yes, that Weisselberg was persecuted by the state because of his relationship with Trump, and Trump admitted knowing that the company was paying for Weisselberg's apartment, which was an issue in the tax fraud case. But Trump denied knowing that Weisselberg was reporting transactions inaccurately in the books and records of the company. Trump says that he learned that only in connection with the tax fraud trial. Now, what's really interesting is that Trump's testimony has been covered extensively by more than 200 news outlets. 32% of the reporting is coming from the left, and 26% is coming from the right. And if you compare the headlines, you'll start to see some interesting framing emerge. On the left, you have outlets using terminology like temper tantrum and out of control, with reference to Trump's disposition, while on the right, you'll find outlets using words like tangles or clashes. Now, these word changes are subtle, but they play a big role in how readers perceive the story. The first set of words might imply that Trump alone is acting out, while the second set of words might imply that Trump is defending himself against statements from the judge. Now, this is all possible thanks to today's sponsor, Ground News, a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And I especially like the new Ground News comparison feature, which highlights specific differences between the left and right reporting. For stories on Trump's testimony, you can see that left-leaning outlets tend to focus on the trial itself, and that Judge Engoron has stated he'll draw negative inferences from Trump's testimony, while the right focuses on statements by Eric Trump attacking New York and saying the city is going to hell. And Ground News also has a blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by one side.
Around the time I learned to read, but before I was able to reason for myself, I learned what my loved ones believed to be the most important fact there is to know about life here on Earth. I had been given an ultimatum. I could form a relationship with someone who I could only learn about from ancient stories and perhaps also from the occasional still small voice in my head, hardly distinguishable from my own conscience, or that someone would send me to a very bad place. Trusting so completely those who explained this to me, I quickly decided that the relationship was the obvious choice. It wasn't long afterward that I began hearing fuller descriptions of the bad place I had avoided. Loved ones and teachers, speaking before captive audiences of elementary school children, painted graphic scenes of torture and anguish. Sometimes traveling evangelists would stop by, furnishing these scenes with colorful details which I'd failed to imagine on my own. This kind of torment was, I was constantly reminded, so painful and inescapable that no matter how paralyzing my regular nightmares about it were, I'd never be able to grasp its true horror. The mind of anyone, much less the mind of a child, is incapable of comprehending eternity, after all. I had no reason to fear, though, I was told. I had a relationship with the one who could keep me out of that place. There was no point to the nightmares, the panic, the paranoia. Not if I was sure that
I keep on fucking the A.
I'm a grown-up now, and it's been
The
a little
A.
bit since I stopped believing that place is real, or that the relationship meant to keep me from it was anything more than me mistaking my internal monologue for a dialogue. Over time, the fear has faded, but on occasion, a flash of paranoia will return, sometimes triggered by something as stupid and childish as a comic panel from the late fundamentalist fearmonger Jack Chick. I have made progress, though. What helped me overcome fear the most was
Fuck,
the
again.
origins of the Hell myth. In hope of deconstructing my fear even more thoroughly, though, I've decided to travel to the ancient site synonymous with the Christian hell, and I'm taking you with me. That site is the Valley of Gehenna, or Gehenna, in Jerusalem. As we make our way there, stopping a few places along the way, I'll do my best to explain how the Christian hell myth began and why it's so connected to Gehenna. Traveling with me is my wife Taylor, my buddy Jeremy, who you might recognize from a few previous videos, and my new friend Derek. Okay, we are finally in Jerusalem. Some time has elapsed since the intro of this video, but we're finally here and gearing up to go to Gehenna. I thought we should talk about our upbringings and what we were taught about hell. Now, a lot of you guys already know that I was taught that it was a literal lake of fire and you would burn there for all of eternity in terrible agony unless you accepted Jesus Christ into your heart as your personal Lord and Savior. So, you know, I naturally did that. And Taylor, what about you?
So for me, yeah, it was a place that sinners or people that didn't accept Jesus into their heart went, but I didn't see it as like a lake of fire or that you're going to be like physically burned. I saw it more as just eternal disconnection from God, and I always imagined it as this like abyss that I'm floating in and have no contact with God or anyone.
Jeremy, what do you think about it?
So, my parents didn't really say much of anything about hell, but people I've met in passing, in like religious classes and stuff growing up, they've said it's like a literal lake of fire, worst of the worst, like worst pain you can imagine. Every single moment is absolute torment, and it only gets like worse and worse. So I never bought the whole just disconnection from God thing. Like it's literal, just the worst horribleness imaginable for eternity, which is just incredibly. It's a horrible thought, the whole thing.
It is.
So I took it literally. Good thing I never actually bought it though, until maybe for a couple of years when I was young. But after that, so yeah.
Now, Derek, I want to throw it over to you. Give Jeremy the camera.
Come here. Your turn.
So the question was, or what I was taught growing up.
What
happened
did
in hell?
you think about hell? What were you taught about hell?
Well, I was raised Catholic, and
Same.
I don't know. It was never really explicitly explained to me what heaven was or what hell was. It was more like, you know, good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell. It wasn't really explicitly told to me exactly what that meant. It was kind of like up to my own interpretation, and I never really had a strong connection with the church, so I never really put too much thought into it, frankly. So it never really played a bearing on. I mean, I'm a moral person, but like it didn't play a bearing on, like, I didn't really believe that there was such places, I guess.
You mean you didn't have to be scared into being a decent person?
Yeah, that's
you just did
that's
it all
what
on your own.
Yeah,
Huh? How curious.
I guess I'm lucky. Yeah.
To explain where this Christian myth came from, we've got to start in classical Greece. Plato, quite possibly the most influential Western philosopher ever, taught a dualistic view of humanity. We have a mortal body made of coarse, destructible material, and a soul made of extremely fine, indestructible material. The body can be killed, but the soul, by its very nature, is immortal. What happened to a person's soul once their body died, then? Well, we can get an idea of the Platonic view by examining some of Plato's writing. In Plato's Republic, written around 375 BCE, we find the myth of Ur. In this story, a man named Ur dies, is separated from his body, and is taken, along with others who have died, to a place where judges sit next to holes in the sky and earth. One at a
I
time,
keep on using
souls receive judgment.
my
The
ring
just
finger,
were sent up through a hole
which
in
is
the sky,
S,
the unjust
thinking
were
it's
sent
A.
down through a hole in the earth.
I'm confusing
Those
my
who
ring
descended to
finger
the
and my
underworld
pinky.
had their misdeeds punished 10 times
That's
over
why I'm
for
getting
a period
A
of
wrong so
1,000
much
years.
times, because I keep
Pure
on thinking
souls who
is
descended
S.
through the hole in the sky were rewarded
Or I
for
keep
their
on
good
getting-
deeds with blissful revelry for the same amount of time.
Yeah.
The worst of the impure souls who
Because I keep
committed
I
egregious
keep on thinking my ring finger is
injustices
A.
were condemned to the torturous underworld forever, where savage men of fiery aspect tortured them. When souls completed their 1,000-year stints of rewards and punishments, they were each given a choice as to what type of body in which they liked to be reincarnated, with the choices ranging from animals to wealthy rulers. They then were made to drink from the river of forgetfulness before being reincarnated. Ur was not allowed to drink and was sent back into his body to serve as a messenger to others so that people may remember to live virtuously. Plato presents this story as just that, a story. It's not some historical account. Still, it represents one version of an idea integral to the Platonic view. Souls are immortal and will, in proportion to their deeds in life, receive rewards or punishments after the death of the body. This became the common view of the soul and afterlife in Greek culture, a culture highly influential in the world of early Christians. More on that later. All right, it is time to go into the Old City. Given Christianity's Jewish roots, I should also explain the ancient Jewish ideas surrounding the soul and the afterlife, and really what
they're
better
adding
place
a
to do
O.
that than the Western Wall, which is the only standing remains of the second Jewish temple. Now, early Jews, or at least those who authored the Hebrew Bible, did not have a dualistic view of humanity. When the body died, the person did not survive. This view can be seen in what is quite possibly the oldest book in the Hebrew Bible, the Book of Job. But a man dies and is laid low. He breathes his last and is no more. As the water of a lake dries up or a riverbed becomes parched and dry, so he lies down and does not rise. Till the heavens are no more, people will not awake or be roused from their sleep. I can already hear some of you typing, what about the term Sheol, used dozens of times throughout the Hebrew text? Is this not the Old Testament's way of referring to hell? In a word, no. Sheol is not described as a place of conscious torment, or even a place of consciousness at all. In many places throughout the Hebrew Bible, Sheol is a synonym for death, the grave, or a pit.
Okay, so
a corpse.
this one is gonna be my O is my
There's a convention
finger
in
on my
ancient
right
Hebrew
hand.
poetry called the synonymous parallelism. This is where, instead of rhyming two lines, the poet expresses an idea in one line, then expresses the same idea in a second line, but in different words. You could say that here the ideas rhyme rather than the words themselves. Take Psalm 16:10. Because you will not abandon me to Sheol, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. Or Proverbs 1:12. Let's swallow them alive like Sheol, and whole like those who go down to the pit. In these verses, the authors equate Sheol to a place of decay and a pit, neither being a place of torment. Now, there is a bit more complexity and ambiguity surrounding this term that I can't quite communicate here, but I can confidently say that non-sectarian biblical scholars do not believe Sheol to be similar to, much less synonymous with, hell. If you'd like to learn more about Sheol yourself, check out the video linked in the description. In short, then, the Jewish people, at least those who authored the Hebrew Bible, did not believe in the immortal soul, a conscious afterlife, or rewards and punishments in an afterlife. You guys feel being in the spotlight for once.
We're behind the camera for a reason.
All right, there's just one more ancient way of thinking we need to understand before we get to Gehenna. This is the really fascinating stuff, at least in my opinion, the Jewish apocalyptic view of bodily death and resurrection. Apocalypticism was a very popular view among Jews in Jesus' time, as well as a few centuries prior. In this view, evil forces such as demons, principalities, and willful powers like sin had gained control of the world, which is why so much suffering and political turmoil existed. To a people like the Jews who'd been made victim of military conquest, foreign occupation, and religious persecution around that time, there was a lot of evil and suffering to explain. God was soon to intervene, though. Any day now, God would take back control from the forces of evil, establish a utopian kingdom on earth, and then judge all people based on how they lived. If a person sided with God and was righteous, they'd be rewarded with admission to his earthly kingdom, where they would live eternally. That kingdom, by the way, would be headquartered right here in Jerusalem. If a person sided with the forces of evil, they'd be destroyed, wiped out of existence completely. Now, it wouldn't be fair, ancient people thought, if only those living at the time were judged. So God, in fairness, would bodily resurrect everyone who had ever died and subject them to the same judgment. The godly would be bodily raised from the dead and live eternally, while everyone else would be bodily resurrected only to be destroyed and forever forgotten. John the Baptist, the infamous Pharisees, and the authors of the book of Daniel all shared this view. Most importantly for this video, though, is another influential person who held to this view, Jesus himself. As Jesus says at the start of our oldest gospel, Mark, "The time has come. The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news." Critical scholars widely agree that Jesus held this view, as his most well-attested teachings were consistent with apocalypticism. The forces of evil reigned for a time, but that time is coming to an end. God's kingdom is about to be established on earth, so repent so that you may enter into it. Jesus, like most apocalyptic thinkers, thought that this was going to happen very soon, even within the lifetime of his disciples. And he said to them, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power." Clearly, though, that didn't happen. Early Christians waited and waited for God's kingdom to arrive, but it never did. Once a generation had passed and everyone alive at the time of Jesus had died, what were Christians to do? Give up hope? Admit that Jesus was wrong? No, that couldn't be it. There had to be another explanation, they thought. What if we just misunderstood Jesus' teachings?
We need to find a spot that's a little more comfortable, a little less sunny.
This is where the Greek ideas we discussed earlier become relevant. Most early Christians were not Jewish in origin. They were converted pagans from cultures surrounding the Mediterranean. This area at the time had extremely strong Greek cultural influences. I mean, the Gospels themselves were written in Greek, even though the characters in them would have spoken primarily Aramaic. Whether you were a Christian familiar with the apocalyptic view and were looking for a new interpretation of Jesus' message, or more likely were a newly converted pagan hearing Jesus' teachings for the first time without ever knowing about Jewish apocalypticism, it would have been very easy to see Jesus' teachings through a Platonic lens. Take Jesus' parable of the weeds. When his disciples ask what it means, he explains, "The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin, and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father." If you understand the Jewish apocalyptic view, this is pretty clear. At the end of time, God will send angels to destroy all those judged to be evil. They'll be burned up and destroyed just like the weeds plucked from a field. Without adherence to or understanding of apocalypticism, though, this could be interpreted another way. Perhaps, as in Greek myths, evil people will be punished after death. Their souls will be thrown into a fiery torment, and since souls are immortal by nature, the torment will last forever. What about the end of Mark chapter 9? There, Jesus says, "And if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into Gehenna, where the worms that eat them do not die, and the fire is not quenched." Many early Christians could have easily thought that this mysterious Gehenna referred to the destination of wicked souls after death, where they'd burn in eternal fire. This is, in fact, the interpretation that eventually became most popular among Christians, but it fails to acknowledge two key pieces of information. Not only was Jesus speaking apocalyptically, but also Gehenna was a real, earthly place.
Okay, the moment we've all been waiting for, the anticlimax of all anticlimaxes. This is the general area, at least, of the Valley of Gehenna, hell on earth. It looks pretty nice to me. Just to be clear, we're not entirely sure where the events that I'm about to describe about the Valley of Gehenna occurred precisely, but we're in the same spot, generally speaking. We're at the foot of Mount Zion, generally regarded as the Valley of Gehenna.
I'm getting confused.
Hell, basically. This park, Jesus talked about this specific place, and a lot of Christians think that Gehenna, like the Valley of Ben Hinnom, means hell. No, it just means here. So we're just showing this is a nice place. It's not real. Gehenna is a valley just outside of the old city of Jerusalem, which was mentioned several times in the Hebrew Bible. It's first mentioned in Joshua 15:8, where it's called the Valley of the Son of Hinnom, or in Hebrew, Gay Ben Hinnom. This place was widely reviled among ancient Jews because it had once been the site of child sacrifice. In 2 Kings 23:10, it said that Molech, a Canaanite deity or deities, received child sacrifices there. In order to put a stop to this, the passage says, King Josiah desecrated the valley, perhaps in part by burning it. This place is mentioned many more times in the Hebrew Bible, often as a place where God would pile up the corpses of the wicked at the end of time. It is consistently described as a vile and blasphemous place. At the end of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus combines this view of Gehenna with an image found in the last verse of Isaiah, where God says that after the final judgment, his people will go out and look on the dead bodies of those who rebelled against me. The worms that eat them will not die. The fire that burns them will not be quenched, and they will be loathsome to all mankind. These are dead earthly bodies being destroyed, not conscious immortal souls being eternally tormented. Most early Christians would not have been aware of this extensive Jewish context, so it isn't hard to see how these teachings of Jesus, when viewed through a Hellenistic lens, looked like something very different. Rest assured though, Gehenna is not hell, and it's quite unlikely that hell was a part of the historical Jesus teachings.
So how does it feel, Drew, to be in the Valley of Gehenna?
Maybe healing is what I would say. I mean, this has got to be the most serene, idyllic, and peaceful place we've been on this entire trip. It's kind of wonderful here, and that's a great realization to be able to have when it was so traumatizing to be taught that it was just the complete opposite. Now, I think if many of us who once were or perhaps still are Christian are honest with ourselves, we must acknowledge that one of the major reasons we put our faith in Christ in the first place is that we didn't want to go to hell. We'd heard shockingly horrifying descriptions of eternal torment, became afraid, and were motivated to take a leap of faith to eliminate any risk of having that happen to us. While I don't think the concept of hell was originally devised just to frighten people into converting, it certainly proved itself a useful means to that end. This was the case even very early in Christian history. In a Christian apocryphal text dating to the 3rd century, the Acts of Thomas, there's a story about a non-Christian woman who dies and is taken on a brief guided tour of hell. There, she sees various gruesome, agonizing punishments inflicted on sinners. She's brought back to life in front of a crowd and immediately recounts her experience. The Apostle Thomas then tells everyone present that these punishments, and even many worse than these, await those who do not turn to God. The entire crowd then converts on the spot. This story is certainly legendary, but it does reflect a certain reality. Even within a couple hundred years of Jesus, Christian evangelists like this author were using stories of hell as a tool for making converts. I can't tell you how many times as a child I was presented sermons, Sunday school lessons, and even children's radio programs that terrified me with threats of eternal hellfire. So many people I knew converted after being purposely frightened by a message like that, and those of us who did cried countless times over the torment that awaited the non-Christians we knew and loved. As I said earlier, I accepted salvation at a very young age, and I knew that would supposedly keep me from going to hell. Still, when you constantly feed a child stories of incomparably painful torture, where the first billion years is just the beginning, every time reassuring them that the story is true, they're nearly guaranteed to be deeply emotionally scarred. It's been a long journey for me to work through that, and learning about the hell myth's true origins has greatly helped me along my way. I hope it can do the same for you. Now, the next time someone tells me that I'm going to go to hell, I'll be able to say that I've already been and found the tales of its inclement weather to be greatly exaggerated. There's a lot more to the story of hell's origins, so if you want to learn more, I highly recommend Dr. Bart Ehrman's book, Heaven and Hell. I used it as a source for this video and greatly enjoyed reading through it multiple times. Definitely check it out. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support and for making this trip possible in the first place. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.
Oh, is it a picture? You've been recording?
Yeah, I had to put the crew really through hell for this video. It was, I don't know, what do you guys think? How do you feel being here?
It's very peaceful, actually. It's like the perfect temperature, the sun is shining. I like hell.
It's not like hell at all.
How's it going, guys? How's the shoot?
Not so bad. Having a good time. Really annoyed at some old priests that are preventing us from bringing cameras into a church.
How dare they?
Otherwise, good.
Here we see a wild Jeremy in his natural habitat.
What is he on the hunt for?
He's taking some B-roll.
In a recent conversation with Alex O'Connor of Cosmic Skeptic, he shared something that got me thinking about the appeal of religious arguments.
One of the biggest criticisms that I have of Christianity is the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God who wants to come to know us, why does he seemingly so routinely hide his existence from so many of us? This is an argument. This is something that can be syllogized, as Schellenberg famously did. It's an argument you can put in premise form. But what it's getting at is not something in argumentative form, but rather the lack of experience. And so this is an argument that I think works, and I think is a good reason to doubt the truth of Christianity. But the moving part of the argument, the captivating part of the argument, is not the way that the premises entail the conclusion, but rather the intuitive feeling that this lack of experience is somehow meaningful in trying to determine whether Christianity is true or not.
Leading with arguments which are meant to be intuitively convincing most of all is common in discourse on philosophy, religion, politics, and any other subject really, though few, I think, are willing to be as honest about that as Alex. Some formal arguments for God, I'd say, go even further than intuitive appeal and instead play on our emotions, especially existential fears. These arguments are so optimized for this that they, for certain believers, serve less as a justification for belief in God and more as a justification for beliefs which help mitigate existential dread. In a way, these arguments for God are not really about God. Before we get into specifics, I've got two disclaimers. One, I'm not saying all arguments for God are this way. Ontological and cosmological arguments, for instance, while sometimes quite intuitive, are not emotionally appealing. Two, this discussion is not meant to show that the arguments in question are logically invalid or unsound. While I do think these arguments are unsound, that is not for any reason that I'll present here. Alright, let's jump in. Arguments from morality. One popular form of an argument from morality is syllogized as follows. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values exist, therefore God exists. The idea that morality might not be so simple as to be called objective in some transcendent sense is frightening for many, especially when it's conflated with total moral chaos in frenzied statements from religious apologists.
So it's not an objective morality then, that's what you're saying. Right? Morality's not objective.
No, it's
There's,
not.
Okay, so there's nothing wrong with the Nazis. There's nothing wrong with rape, slavery.
When the alternative to accepting the argument is framed as accepting the worst atrocities imaginable, fears are stoked, and accepting the argument appears to be the only relief. This argument can play on more subtle, positive emotions too. Believing morality is transcendently objective can allow us to believe that morality is as simple as our strong moral impulses can make it seem. That our emotions which tell us that our moral group is superior to all others are unique and justified objectively. So, I think many accept this argument largely because they want one of its premises to be true, not just because they want its conclusion to be true. Even though the conclusion of this argument, that God exists, rests on the premise that objective morality exists, I think many come to view each of these ideas as justification for the other. Not only does God exist because morality is objective, but morality is objective because God exists. In this way, ideas about God become wrapped up in how we manage our existential fears and sense of moral superiority. Arguments from fine-tuning. This argument goes something like, cosmology shows us that there are several physical constants that govern the universe as we know it. If any one of those constants were even slightly different, the universe as we know it, including life, would not exist. The constants existing as they do is highly improbable without the intentional fine-tuning of an intelligent creator, so it's more probable that a creator does exist and is responsible for this fine-tuning. The way this is often presented focuses on humans as the end product of the universe, the entire point of its existence. This is extremely flattering. We want to be the end product of the universe. We find ourselves to be more important than anything in the universe, so it only fits to believe that there's some grand cosmic reason for that. Those who present this argument could focus on the universe being fine-tuned for creating spheres of gas, or centuries-long storms on gas giants like Jupiter, or binary pulsars, but that wouldn't stroke our egos quite as well. Of course, the alternative to accepting this argument, apologists often claim, is embracing self-hating nihilism. Because after all, if we are not the entire point of the universe, it's impossible for us to matter in any way at all.
In atheism? Do we have any reason to believe that human beings are special? No. We're just evolved creatures. We're the result of accident and chance. And this is part of the existential crisis for those who are atheists. Because atheism reduces us to cosmic junk. We are just biological accidents. We're the ultimate unplanned pregnancy. Our physical parts are just stuck together without any reason, without any purpose. Human beings are nothing.
When this kind of dichotomy is presented, accepting the fine-tuning argument is very appealing. Once again, the appeal of this argument lies in its premises and presentation, not in its conclusion. We believe this because of what it says about us, not because of what it says about God. Arguments from consciousness. There are many different forms of arguments from consciousness, but generally they all involve the ideas that human consciousness is non-physical, that consciousness has not been or can't be explained naturalistically, and that the existence of a non-physical mind like God explains the existence of consciousness. Arguments from the apparent design of other physiological features like the eye or hand do exist, but I believe those to be far less convincing than the argument of consciousness because those features are not as important to us as consciousness. A man with no eyes, hands, or most other physical features is still a man, but a man without consciousness? That is an automaton or an animal. At this argument's base is the assumption that human consciousness is so unique that it must not be a result of physical processes. The core of humanity is not composed of the profane, but rather the sacred. This is, in my view, purely self-congratulatory. We want to believe that we humans possess some quality which makes us unique from all other complex systems in the universe and superior to all other animals. More important than justifying belief in God, this argument provides a satisfying explanation for why we are so special. Our sense of self-awareness was supernaturally created by the only thing in the universe that could ever be superior to us, God himself. While we're on the topic of staying aware of emotional appeal and biased presentation, let me tell you about Ground News, this video sponsor. Tons of commenters have let me know that they love Ground News and are happy I plugged it a few videos back, so hear me out. Ground News is a website and app that lets you compare news across the political spectrum effortlessly. They aggregate news from thousands of sources and, right up front, show you political bias, ownership of news outlets, and factual reliability. This way you can see through bias straight away and get informed easily. So check out this story about the Supreme Court taking on another religious freedom case. Ground News provides a summary at the top for every story. I can also see that there are 117 sources reporting on this, and then if I scroll down, I can see that every source is rated as far as factuality, locality, and political bias. Let's look at the bias distribution tool on this. This is one of my favorite tools from Ground News. Only 10% right political bias coverage, so not many right-leaning sources reporting on this as compared to center and left. Interesting, I wonder why that is. Now that I've checked all of that out, I can compare articles and start reading. If you want to stay informed, you've got to get out of your echo chamber and account for bias when reading the news. I use Ground News because it's simply the most efficient way I've found to do that. So to try it out and support my channel in the process,
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex, and it's good to be back. If you're wondering where I've been, you can watch my latest live stream or the video called What Happened to This Channel. In the meantime, because of my absence, I don't feel like YouTube's algorithm will be on my side for a little while, so if you haven't already, be sure to hit the little notification bell next to the subscribe button down below, and follow me on Twitter, where I probably express more of my thoughts than even here on YouTube, so be sure to do that if you don't want to miss anything. Now, I'm sure you will know by now how much I love moral philosophy, and you probably know that I disagree with many of my atheist colleagues like Stephen, Rationality Rules, or Matt Dillahunty, or people like Sam Harris, who say that morality can be and is objective. I don't think it's possible to prove in any objective sense that a person should or shouldn't act in a particular way. I don't think this can be demonstrated. And though I've discussed this before, I haven't fully spelled out why I think this way. One important factor has always been my atheism. Previously, one of the premises of my argument that objective morality can't exist was the assumption of atheism. I used to think that the religious were the only ones who could legitimately lay claim to a worldview that does have some room for an objective understanding of morality, but as I've been thinking more about it, I've come to realize that even they, the religious, ultimately, as far as I can see, can't provide an objective basis for morality either. This might surprise you. It seems a given that if there really is a God, morality can easily be shown to be objective, but I honestly don't now think this to be the case, which marks a significant shift in my moral philosophy since this closed what I previously considered to be the final possible gap in which objective morality could be said to exist. And with that gone, I'm now of the view that all morality, even religious morality, is ultimately subjective. And this makes objective morality impossible, as far as I'm concerned, even just in principle. And I can't overemphasize how important this is. This has massive philosophical implications, not least that it seems to lead logically to nihilism for many people, an incredibly uncomfortable philosophy and one that I'll be discussing very soon. But before I can have such discussions, I need to solidify my moral philosophy and explain it as precisely as I can to you. And so I've decided to make some videos doing exactly that. That means that there are a few things I need to cover. First, I need to explain what I mean by morality. Not just what is good and what is bad, but what is good and what is bad. Then I need to show why I think that morality is and has to be subjective. And this means I need to first show why religious morality is subjective, even if God does exist, and even if he really is the author of good and bad. And then I need to show why atheistic notions of objective morality, like Sam Harris's for instance, are also flawed and ultimately subjective too. The reason for covering both bases is to attempt to show that not only is morality subjective, but it has to be subjective, regardless of the existence or non-existence of God. Now, this first video will both outline how I define morality and explain why I think religious morality is subjective, and a subsequent video will explain
making a
why
lot of
I think
mistakes.
atheistic morality is subjective
Okay,
too.
come
And
on.
then perhaps a further video will explore the implications that this all has, like the claim that it leads to nihilism, if that's something you'd want to see. And this is a big topic, and I'll be disagreeing with some big names and popular philosophies. Most of my friends and colleagues disagree with me here, so the likelihood is that there will be something in this video that you object to. If you do, then good. Let me know why. And if not, let me know if that means I've changed your mind in any way. So let's get going with this. First, I need to define what I actually mean by morality, and this isn't as simple as it seems. I saw a clip of Tracy Harris on the Atheist Experience recently arguing with someone, and she proposed what I think is a good way to understand what we mean when we say morality. She asked the caller to imagine that he was trying to determine whether or not a dog had moral tendencies. What would we look for in that dog or in the dog's psychology to determine whether or not it's a moral agent? This helps us pinpoint precisely what we mean by morality. Now, Tracy argued that we would look for a recognition of certain concepts like fairness and empathy, and if the dog recognizes fairness, for instance, and acts in a way to procure it, we can call it a moral agent. Now, I think Tracy's great, but I can't agree with this. Let me give you an example to explain why. Imagine we were to design a robot, and we programmed it to be selfless and bring about what we, the programmers, felt was fairness. As the robot goes about its business, fulfilling its programming and procuring fairness, could you call it a moral agent when it's just fulfilling the commands of its programming? I don't think you could, even though it technically has a recognition of the concept of fairness. I think there's more to it than that. I think morality is twofold. First, it entails a recognition that some things are good and others are bad. And secondly, and this isn't the same thing, an intuition that we ought to do that which is good and ought not do that which is bad. I'll dive more into that soon, but the reason that I think we need this, more than just a recognition of concepts like fairness, to be encompassed into our definition, is because the reason I wouldn't call our robot a moral agent is because it has no recognition of good or bad or any concept of moral ought. It procures fairness because it's programmed to, not because it feels that it should. If it did have an experience of ought, we may well call it a moral agent. So that's why I define morality in this way. So I suppose I would define morality as the intuition that we ought to do that which is good and ought not to do that which is bad. This definition is incredibly broad, of course, but with good reason. The reason is that it can encompass all popular notions of morality, and so we don't need to fall at the first hurdle. For instance, Sam Harris's notion that we ought to do that which brings about well-being, and thinking that well-being is good, is a belief that we ought to do that which is good. It fits our definition. Religious morality too fits into it, since the religious feel we ought to do that which God has defined as good. This is why I think this is the best definition of morality to start with, because it's broad enough that we can all agree with it. But it's important to keep in mind that the definition is composed of two parts, the good and bad, and the ought and ought not. They're not the same thing, and we'll see why this is so important shortly. But now, of course, we run into the problem of defining what we mean by good, or bad, or ought, since we're using these words in our definition. You might say that these terms need themselves to be independently defined within our broader definition. But the reason I haven't done so is because I believe it's impossible to do so. You'll hopefully understand this by the end of the video, but my whole point here is that the reason morality can't be objective is precisely because good, bad, and ought can't be defined. I subscribe to G.E. Moore's notion that good is like the colour yellow. It has no synonyms. It can't be described to someone who's never experienced it. Nonetheless, you know what I mean by yellow, and you know what I mean by good. Even if you disagree when I call a particular thing good, the very fact that you can disagree demonstrates that you still know what I mean by good, even whilst disagreeing that that particular thing is good. For instance, Sam Harris might say, and has said, that throwing acid in the face of a girl is not good. If someone were to claim that doing so actually is good, they clearly have a wildly different moral philosophy, and yet to
Now you're in West Bank.
Officially in West Bank.
So we're in Palestine now.
I went to Israel recently, and while there, took a day trip to Ramallah and Palestine. As you might guess, atheists don't have it easy there. Apparently, as a Western visitor, though, the social cost for atheism is negligible.
We're going there. We're going to tell people we're atheists, okay? Because we're not Jewish. We're atheists.
It's not no. They don't care.
They don't care.
As long as you're not Jewish, you can be atheist.
In the future, I'll likely release a video or two documenting the trip as a whole, but here we'll focus on individual interviews. My friends and I decided to take advantage of our relative safety and do what local atheists can't. Ask Palestinians what they think of atheists.
Hi, are you free to talk to us? Busy. Okay. Excuse me, are you free to talk to us? No? That's okay. Excuse me, are you free to talk to us? No. Trying. Excuse me, are you free to talk to us? You do speak English? Okay. Yeah. That was English. Not even. Oh, we're gonna get lots of rejections. Trust me, I've done this.
كنت سترايكر كيف asking people أغلبك نسألك سؤال عادي ولا لا؟
What do you think of atheist people?
إنه شو رأيك في ناس ملحدين؟
I don't know, maybe they are misguided or something. I don't know.
What do you think of atheist people?
عادي كل واحد الله يعين علينا كل واحد ونفسيته
Whatever they want to believe.
What do you think of atheists and atheist people?
شو رأيك في الملحدين وناس الملحدين؟
انه احكي عربي صح؟ انه يعني هاي بصفي حريه شخصيه
It's personal freedom.
بس انه يعني شيء مش عادي بس انه بتصفي انه يعني الشخص ودينه الشخص وكيف تربى الشخص وكيف اهله.
He's saying it's not regular, it's not common, but at the same time it's up to everyone how they were raised and how they were brought up.
True.
What do you think of atheists?
Speaking facts.
اللهم عافينا.
اللهم عافينا بس.
No opinion.
May Allah protect us. It's something you say when you see a disaster, something so sad, like please God, like protect us from this evil.
Oh, okay.
What do you think of atheists?
والله الناس عايشين لا في دين ولا دنيا ولا آخرة شو بدي أقول لك يعني.
It's like you are living with no life and no afterlife or whatever.
You think that's a bad thing?
هذا بالنسبة لك شيء سيء يعني ولا؟
أكيد اللي يعيش بدون يعني فيش إله قانون يحكمه.
You say that if you don't have any rules to guide you or no God, yeah.
That seems like a really good video. I need to watch that on my off time. Hey. Give the hard. Come on, baby. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Come on, let's do one. We've been going at this for like an hour. I want it to be like an hour every day, so just get this one out of the way. Yeah, I'm chilling. Oh,